Hello and hello everybody. It's really a pleasure for me as president of our European Progressive Foundation to invite you to join us for our first big event after the opening session, which is this United for Conference we usually organize in New York, but today we are in Brussels connecting to all over the world. And we want you to invite to discuss this big challenge we have at us, which is we need a recovery, but this recovery must be a people's powered recovery. And we need to work together to imagine what should be a people's power recovery. Today, we'll invite, first of all, two outstanding personalities. Outstanding, I mean, in intellectual terms and political terms, to kick off this debate, giving us a general assessment of the international situation. And I'm very pleased to introduce the High Representative of the European Union for the External Action, Josep Borrell, also a Vice President of the European Commission. And the second personality, outstanding one, Madeleine Albright, former State Secretary of the United States, and now heading Madeleine Albright's groups in Washington. I'm very pleased to count on you to introduce a dialogue to assess the global landscape. And let me start by challenging you with the first big issue, which is in fact the future of multilateralism.
Thank you, Maria. Because we will let you go through with them directly.
Yes. So,
yes, I think
let me now
you may start. Yes,
with our guests, and I would like to give you a hint for our first debate to assess the global landscape and the chances for a progressive agenda to move forward, which is in fact about the future of multilateralism. And we just saw a General Assembly renewing the mandate of Antonio Guterres as Secretary General with a quite ambitious and bold agenda, the call our common agenda, where there is a call for an effective multilateralism, an inclusive multilateralism, but also bold objectives, notably a new global deal and a new social contract. So these are key ideas to imagine and to implement a people's power recovery. But the question is, what are the chances to move forward in this agenda when we have a multipolar world and on the top of this, the current strategic competition between the United States and China? I will give you the floor, starting with Josep Borrell. You are supposed to have short answers, but of course the dialogue for us is a real privilege to have both of us with us. So Josep, please, you can start. While we are waiting, let me recall that this mandate, which was given to Guterres, was prepared by a long process connected with the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. And we, Progressive Family, we were very active to give our contribution. And we were able to organize a meeting of the board of the Progressive Alliance in New York on the eve of the General Assembly 1 year ago. And in this meeting, we adopted our progressive agenda for the next period in the United Nations. And we're also pleased to see that many of our ideas were reflected somehow in this mandate given to Guterres upon his document called Our Common Agenda. Of course, we progressives, we want an effective multilateralism, we want an inclusive multilateralism, but also a fair one. And what do we mean by a fair one? Well, let me give you some examples. One of them is for sure to respond to the COVID crisis with universal access to vaccination. This is number one. Secondly, is to make sure that the recovery plans being launched now everywhere, they should really promote the green and digital transition, but also they should be able to tackle all social inequalities. So I see that this is already included in Guterres' mandate, but again, we should address now the question I propose is, what are the chances to renew multilateralism when we have this multipolar world and on the top of this strategic competition between China and the United States? Well, I'm very pleased to start by welcoming Madeleine Albright. Madeleine, many thanks for joining us this big event in Brussels. I'm right now located at the center of the European Parliament in Brussels. And I'm extremely honored on the behalf of the Global Progressive Forum to give you the floor to elaborate on this issue. I just introduce you as an outstanding global and American politician, but also an outstanding intellectual. And Madeleine, many thanks. The question is, what are the chances to renew multilateralism in the current global landscape?
Well, first of all, let me say how delighted I am to be a part of this discussion. And having listened to what the program is going to be for a couple of days, I am really very, very impressed with all the things that you are about to do. So delighted to be a part of this. I'm also very glad that you addressed this first question to me because you can't laugh, but I am known as multilateral Madeleine. I really do believe that multilateralism, given the issues that are out there, is absolutely essential and that we need to work together. I do have to say, though, that people question what multilateralism is about. And I have been saying in many ways that Americans are distrustful of the word multilateralism. It has too many syllables and it ends in an ism. But I think that the important part is to understand that the issues that are out there absolutely require the kind of cooperation that can only come when people are trying to solve problems together from their various positions in the world. I don't think that it means that we totally obscure the role of the nation state, because that is the basis of a lot of how we operate in the world today. But I do think that the kind of cooperation that comes, that the Secretary General has been talking about, is something that is very important. I also do believe the following, and I would love to put this out there as we begin our discussion. In many ways, this period is similar to what happened after World War II. The best part, however, is that Europe is not destroyed as a result of the war. Europe is a functioning and a very vibrant set of countries. But I do think that the establishment of a lot of the multilateral institutions comes from that period. They do need fixing. And I think that this is the kind of subject we should take up. What are the areas where the multilateral institutions need upgrading, the challenge that the Secretary General has, and how we all can be a part of helping to make multilateralism a way of dealing with issues that require large international cooperation, climate change, pandemics, and various issues that we must deal with together. Thank you very much.
Madeleine, such a clear answer. And this is the good moment now to listen to Josep Borrell. Josep, many thanks for joining our dialogue. I just introduce you as our European High Representative for External Action and also a Vice President of the European Commission. Josep, please tell us what you think about how to renew multilateralism in this multipolar world, and also this world now marked by strategic competition between the United States and China.
Well, difficult to answer this question because it's too broad. But it's clear for me that today challenges require to increase cooperation to ensure that international organizations can fulfill their functions in a more efficient, effective, and transparent way. This would include working on United Nations funding and reform of the United Nations development system. This will require to improve the efficiency of UN peacekeeping missions and the effectiveness of a number of bodies, not the least the World Trade Organization or the World Health Organization. For that, we should join forces on a range of joint priorities, supporting democracy. Here at the European Union, we have quite an important set of actions, democracy support plans, democracy funds. We have to uphold transparency, certainly to combat corruption. It becomes a kind of a phrase faite, something that you say when you don't have anything else to say. But it's completely true that today corruption has become systemic in too many countries. And with corrupt governments, you cannot pretend to be multilateral, not even to be unilateral. Well, there is a new threat to multilateralism is disinformation. Disinformation has become a real pandemic, a new pandemic that threatens our democracy and becomes toxic on many of our multilateral fronts. The health system is also something in which multilateralism was absent, and now it has to be very much present. We have to increase our preparedness for the pandemics because this one will not be the last one. And since the COVID outbreak, we have been making a major contribution to global pandemic response. We have been a driving force in supporting World Health Organization, but we have to reform the World Health Organization. It's not well fitted to the kind of health problem that we have today. And the offer of a democratic world should be at least as compelling as that of other global actors. It's clear that our relationship with the US, the EU-US relationship, will be a defining factor on building the international rules-based order, multilateralism, will be a defining factor. If we agree and we work together, then we can do a lot of things. If we disagree and we stay apart from each other, like it has happened in the last 4 years, then multilateralism has no choices, has no hope. So we have to invest more on our relationship with the US. We did that on the COVID-19 summit. We take a strong commitment, 70% objective of global vaccination by the end of next year, to produce through a manufacturing supply chain task force. It's something in which we can prove that joining forces to expand the therapeutic capacity and address bottlenecks in supply chains and other issues, we can be much more efficient. And certainly, the big multilateral issue is how to fight against climate change. But I think this is the following question.
Many thanks for this very large and comprehensive assessment of the situation of the multilateral system. And this is exactly my second question is, let's now focus on climate change because first of all, we just left COP26. And I'd like to have from both of you your assessment, your stock taking about the outcomes of this COP26. And also, if we focus on the particular issue of financing developing countries to support their green transition, we are still below what is needed, clearly. So how do you think we can address this? This is a concern for progressives, for sure. So I would like to listen to Madeleine again, please.
Well, I was very interested in the things that Mr. Borrell said because he laid out a very complicated and important agenda that we need to address. And obviously, climate change is one that requires multilateral help. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that no one country can do it alone. I do think that in many ways, what happened in Glasgow was a big step forward because there were discussions among a huge number of countries about the necessity of doing something very important in terms of dealing with the threat of climate change. And there were a number of decisions made and action plans that were taken. I do think that there are those who are critical of some of the things that happened or thought that not enough happened or any number of different aspects to it. And I have to say that I really do agree with what the climate envoy now, John Kerry, said, is that in fact, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I was a diplomat, so I don't say this lightly. I do think that COP26 was a major diplomatic win because it's the first time ever that fossil fuel subsidies and phase outs were openly discussed. And 6 years after the Paris Agreement, there were important implementation rules were finally agreed upon, opening the door to some critical international trading of carbon credits. And then, as I mentioned, more than 100 countries joined the US UK led effort to limit methane emissions. So, and important pledges were made on deforestation and on a host of other issues. So, I think that it was an important meeting. I think also something I hope that we consider a bit is that it was encouraging to see the private sector step up to the plate so strongly in Glasgow because it really did. They're bound by 450 major financial institutions delivering on some of the net zero emissions by 2050. So there are an awful lot of things that obviously have to be looked at, definitions, measurements, auditing, but I would like to say that on the whole, it was a success and something that has to now be followed up very diligently, obviously in partnership between the Europeans and Americans, but others also in a very big way.
Thank you very much, Madeleine Albright, for this very precise assessment. Now let's listen to Josep Borrell as the European Union High Representative. Please.
Well, just this morning at the College of the Commissioners, we have got a report from my colleague and friend Franz Timmermans about how was the COP26. Well, the COP26 has to reflect a global consensus and almost 200 countries, and by necessity, it represents a compromise. So it's a step in the right direction, but certainly much work remains to be done. At the end, about fossil fuels, China and India managed on Saturday to soften the formulation of the text about coal, and it's no longer uh, about getting out of coal, sortie du charbon, but reduction of the coal. A single word makes a big difference. And one can understand, no? China and India represents half of the coal consumption in the world. And in the electricity systems, depends a lot of that. But it shows that the resistance to abandon fossil fuels is stronger than expected. And at the last minute, we change the word. Nevertheless, we managed to agree, and the Paris rule book, which is important for the well functioning of the global system to cut emissions. The message is clear: to have to reduce, I'm not going to say to cancel, but to reduce the fossil fuel subsidies. And we repeated the commitment to double finance for adaptations. But to keep alive the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, we need to halve emissions between now and 2030. In 9 years, we need to halve emissions. And you can imagine that at the world level, what does it mean? Just to take the example of India, 4 million people lives directly of the coal producing electricity. This will represent a big effort for the developing and non-developing and developed countries, because today 2/3 of the emissions come from non-OECD countries. 2/3 comes from non-OECD countries. We, Europeans, we did our part by setting the highest global standard for emission reduction and the world's largest climate finance contributor. We also drove important initiatives about just transition for South Africa, pledges for the methane, forest adaptation, and we were crucial on brokering a final compromise. Let me stress the global methane pledge, because not everything is about CO2. 100 countries representing 70% of the global economy and half of the anthropogenic methane emissions have now committed to a goal of reducing global methane emissions by 30% from the 2020 levels to by 2030. That's very important because CO2, good, but methane is also there. No? Looking to the next COP, we have to continue our EU climate diplomacy, focusing on the big emitters. The battle against climate change will depend crucially of what China and India are going to do with their energy system. The world needs more energy. The world needs to consume more energy. 1,000 million people have never seen an electric bubble. So we need to increase energy production and at the same time to decarbonize the production of this energy. And this is an incredibly difficult task. So we have to mobilize all our political resources, our pedagogical resources, our commitment, preaching by example, but it will not be enough. US and EU will have once again the occasion to behave as partners in front of the rest of the world. One thing important of the Glasgow is that CBAN was not a subject, including with the Timmermans. Nothing happened about CBAN. Nobody was discussing about this carbon adjustment at the border, which is very significant. And another significant thing is that surprisingly, the US didn't want to increase adaptation finance. Finally, they agreed. and from here to Sharm el Sheikh, the finance will be the key issue, and finance adaptation will be the most important thing, because for many people, adaptation to something that has already happened or will have already happened for them will be crucial for their survival.
Thank you, Josep. Very important the way you emphasize the scale of the change we need to make everywhere. Look, let us now move to another difficult issue, which is the implications of the digital transformation, changing almost everything in our lives. But we know that there is also a risk of a kind of divide. Divide within countries, divide between countries, and also the strategic competition, China and the United States. So my question is there still a room for global standards to make the best of this digital revolution? Give me your answers, and let me also then conclude with the last question. Madeleine Albright, can you start, please, about this?
Well, I do think that one of the things we have to consider is that there are whole new issues that we have to deal with. And the digital ones are clearly one of them. The whole issue of cyber, new weapons, things that we have to deal with. Which leads me just to the following generalization that I feel I must make. I was born in Europe. I'm a European. I was born in Prague. I just happen to have been raised in the United States. So I see the US and European relationship as an absolutely key one. And it strikes me that with over 550 million people in Europe and over 330 in the United States, if we work together, we can do an awful lot together to complement each other in what are these increasingly difficult issues. And I do believe that we have the capability to make up the rules now, the standards, the norms that by which we have to operate in order to deal with the new digitalization and the various aspects of how our two peoples really look at privacy in a different way. Mr. Borrell raised the issues of corruption, which also would come up in some of this, in that certain groupings would mishandle the issues. But I think it's absolutely essential that what we do is see the issues that are coming up are those where the Europe and the United States can complement each other, not in fact work against each other. And trying to figure out how to deal with China, especially on this, because they are the ones that are creating many of the issues to do with information and digitalization and cyber. And so I would like to make sure that as we answer these questions, that we understand the importance of the complementarity of European and American goals, because we do represent a very large portion of the world with a very large portion of the economies, and how we operate together, I think, can be absolutely dispositive in how we deal with these issues in the future that do require a lot of work and will not happen overnight. The various rules that have to be made by the governments and the European commissions in order to deal with this, and then the American approach to this. And it's going to require cooperation and understanding and the importance of complementarity.
Indeed, Madeleine Albright, many thanks. And let's listen to Josep Borrell. Which are your remarks about this fundamental issue, driving the digital transformation?
You know, when the first industrial revolution came, all the economic and social structures were changed, and the balance of power also. You have a look at what happened in the 19th century, you can imagine how big was this transformation just because of the steam, coal, steam, steel. And now we are going to face, we are facing a similar transformation. The social economic structures, the labor, and the balance of power in the world will be changed. And we Western people, US and EU, we have been ruling the world because we were the standard setters. We were fixing the standards. We were the masters of how technology was working. And from steel mills to trains to railways to everything, warfare, we were the standard setting. If we are no longer the standard setting, we will not rule the 21st century. And I am afraid in some fields we are losing the standard setting capacity. And that's why this Trade and Technology Council, which is a code name to talk about China, trade and technology is a way of talking about China, will be very important in order to reinforce our joint capacity to continue being the standard setting of this new big world transformation of digital. Digital is to the world what exactly what happened with the steam uh, 250 years ago. We agreed on both sides of the Atlantic to better protect our democracies and freedom of expression, and more than freedom of expression, I would say the right to truth, the right to people to be well informed. Because democracy is a system that uses information as the oil. The democracy works with an oil which is information. Without information, democracy doesn't make sense. Only well informed citizens give sense to democracy. And digital is interfering in information on the process of creating and disseminating information as never before. It's another another world. And one have to think about who's going to manage this new world. It will be the state, China approach. Will it be the big corporations, big firms, private, but a power independent of the political power, which is we can say what may happen if the big companies that are the master of the digital will be the standard setters, or it will be the society, politically organized, the state under democratic control. And this is going to be the big question mark for our future. Our democracy, our human rights, the health of our political system will depend crucially on how do we master the technological development on the digital field, because digital will be in every minute, in every inch of our environment, everywhere, all the time. And that's why here we are advancing on an ambitious legislation with our Digital Service Act and our Digital Market Act. These are firmly grounded on a shared vision that puts together fairness in the market, safety, and freedom online. But I am not sure that we will be able to win this battle. I'm not sure. Maybe Orwell had a visionary approach to the future. He could never imagine that the brother would be as big as the one that is over our heads and minds all the time. We will be digital slaves, or the digital will make us more free and more cooperative. This is, for me, the most important question mark that humankind is facing today.
Yes, indeed. Josep, I think you are completely right. We are confronted with the biggest, highest scale transformation of our lives and of our historical experience. And let me use the few minutes we have to address something which also connect is that today we are confronted with new kinds of threats, security threats, including those coming from cybersecurity. And I know that right now, European Union is undertaking an important effort to build up a defense capacity based on the so-called European Strategic Compass. Yesterday, you got an important endorsement coming from the Council for your action, Josep Borrell. So I would like you to explain what is going on in this defense front, very important, and then to give the final comment to Madeleine Albright, also having in mind the implications of this effort for the NATO alliance. Please, Josep.
Yes, thank you for giving me the floor for this issue, which is one of the most important in which we are working. Look, the European Union is not a defense union. It's not a military alliance. But in the treaty, it said that we want to build a common security and defense policy. On the other hand, most of the European Union member states are members of NATO. And has to be clear, and I'm not going to lose this opportunity to repeat it, that the NATO is our common framework for the territorial defense of Europe. No doubt about it. We don't want to create an European military alliance. But at the same time, we want to build something called European Common Security and Defense. What does it mean? And for me, it means that we have to be able of taking our part of responsibility. People don't like the word strategic autonomy. Okay, don't use it. Talk about strategic responsibility, because we cannot rely on others to face the problems that we have to face, and NATO will not solve it. For that, what we proposing is that we should be able to act, to reinforce our capacity to act more robustly, rapidly, and decisively. That we have to strengthen our resilience by anticipating and responding to hybrid threats. Look what's happening in the Belarusian border today, and securing strategic domains, cyber, maritime, and the outer space, which will be the new battlefields of the future. Third, we have to invest more to support our defense capabilities, promote defense innovations, and reduce dependencies. We are too much dependent. And four, we have to develop a network of partnership, certainly inside NATO, certainly, but not only with NATO. Also with the US directly. We are going to launch a US-EU security and defense dialogue. Why? Because inside NATO, not all members are European Union members, and not European Union members are members of NATO. So there is a certain disjunction. We have to have partners at the regional and bilateral level with like-minded countries, like in Indo-Pacific, and here also in Europe, and also with United Kingdom, if they want to. Everything has to be done in full coherence with NATO. That's why we will approve the strategic compass in Europe at the same time that the strategic compass in NATO. But we have to do more from our side. We need to increase our capacity to act with partners when possible and alone when necessary. And I think that a stronger European capability to act is on the interest of NATO. A stronger European pillar makes NATO stronger. I don't understand the voices who says, oh, if the European increases their military capabilities, it will make NATO weaker. No, it will make NATO stronger. And each member state has to increase their military capabilities, but since we want to build a joint, a common defense capability, this has to be compatible, more than compatible, complementary with NATO. And this is what about. This is what we are going to discuss in the next month.
Well, all the best for the important initiative you have in your hands. And I'd like really to listen to Madeleine Albright, because she's been following all these issues for several decades. So your final remarks to assess the state of affairs of the NATO alliance and the efforts coming from the European side.
Well, thank you. And I was very pleased to hear Mr. Borrell's explanation of things. I can tell you, as you pointed out, I've been looking at this for a very long time. And the environment changes a lot in terms of how, whether the European Union and NATO can, in fact, operate together better or separately. And I've gone through a variety of times where, for instance, on the 60th anniversary of NATO, I was asked to lead the strategic concept because, frankly, everything was happening out of area. There were no things happening in Europe. And we were trying to figure out how to make that work. And so I say that because the environment changes, and it's important, as we've been discussing, for institutions to be flexible enough to deal with the new issues. I think the issue has been of concern in the following way, is that there be this complementarity between the EU and NATO, so that there's not duplication of effort, and in fact, problems about who's going to do what when. But I think that this is going to require very close cooperation because, as Mr. Borrell pointed out, the membership is different. There are different needs, and we now do see a lot of things happening in Europe, very much involved with some of the subjects that we were talking about earlier. And the differences among the European countries in terms of how they are looking at immigration, digitalization, cyber, what the Russians are trying to do to undermine our alliances so that they can separate us. And therefore, I think I hope very much that we are beginning an era where we are spending time discussing these issues together and not kind of looking at how we can undermine either the EU or NATO. They need to be working together very carefully, looking at issues that have a lot to do with the new problems that are out there, and understanding that there are threats out there now that are quite different than the ones when both these organizations began. And so I hope very much that, and Mr. Borrell said this, that there's going to be a look at what the future is going to bring, how, in fact, the EU is going to be looking at what the threats are going to be, who the partners of the EU can be, how various aspects that are central to NATO, like Article 5, and whether, in fact, cyber is an Article 5 threat, any number of things that do need to be discussed together. And I will end by saying that for me, in having watched this a long time, the key is how to work together and understand that our power and our influence in terms of dealing with issues like the rule of law, the importance of democracy, the importance of information, trying to deal with the various issues that are out there require this approach where we are flexible and are willing to deal with each other, and in fact do have a way of communicating and not kind of doing surprise events that then are very difficult to understand by either side. So I'm delighted to have had a chance to listen to Mr. Borrell, and I am very honored to have been a part of this, and I look forward to further cooperation.
Dear Madeleine Albright, many, many thanks, and many thanks for both of you, because I think we managed in half an hour to bring to the audience very clear messages on a progressive approach to deal with global governance problems nowadays. Now let's close this high-level dialogue with the last golden key, which is about the reference on respecting human rights. And I'm also pleased to bring to you a statement coming from Michelle Bachelet, the United Nations High Commissioner for Fundamental Rights, addressing exactly the issue: how can I make sure that this people's power recovery will respect fundamental rights. Michelle Bachelet, you have the floor.
I'm pleased to take part in this important discussion. The magnitude and scope of inequalities that have been exposed and exacerbated by COVID-19 are truly shocking, although not really surprising. We're talking about inequalities fueled by discrimination, gaps in coverage of social protection systems, or inadequate social protection benefits, all accelerating and deepening the impacts of the pandemic. The numbers are staggering. We have witnessed the first rise in extreme poverty in 2 decades. Over 100 million people are already being pushed into extreme poverty. Around 255 million jobs have been lost in 2020 alone. A number of people living with food insecurity rose to an unprecedented 2.38 billion people. The human rights scars of this pandemic run deep, and we must act urgently to stop them from growing even deeper. The only way for us to recover better and more resilient is by basing our efforts on human rights. And how do we do that? It is simple, by learning the lessons the pandemic has taught us. That means ensuring that social protection, the right to health, and other economic, social, and cultural rights are no longer viewed as theoretical aspirations, but treated and guaranteed as the right that they are, well beyond COVID-19. Recovery measures must include robust social targets. It has become crystal clear social protection systems are not a drain on resources. They are an invaluable investment in sound societies. The pandemic has also taught us that in order to address inequalities, we must end discrimination of any kind. The people most affected were those already most vulnerable due to systemic discrimination. I'm referring to women, people of African descent, older people, members of minority communities, indigenous people, persons with disabilities, migrants, and LGBTI people, among others. A human rights-based response will ensure their participation. The voices of the most affected and vulnerable must inform the recovery efforts. And in these efforts, we must not lose sight of interlinked environmental crises of pollution, climate change, and biodiversity. Once again, human rights must be part of the solution. Just last month, the Human Rights Council created the mandate of a special rapporteur on climate change and recognized for the very first time the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. We will support countries in their efforts to implement it. We have also advocated for human rights-based approaches to climate action at the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow. And finally, the pandemic has shown us how interconnected we are. We either stand together or we fall apart. Let me stress it again. Vaccines and medicines against COVID-19 must be considered as a global public good. Renewing solidarity within every society and between nations is both the right thing to do and the smart thing to do. It is also a cornerstone of the Secretary General's Common Agenda, which aims to combat inequality and guide us to recovering better from the pandemic. As he said, and I'll quote him, "Now is the time to re-embrace global solidarity and find new ways to work together for the common good." End of quote. I count on all of you. Thank you.
United Nations High Commissioner for Fundamental Rights, many, many thanks. Very clear, powerful statement. You are really a brave woman. We count on you. And with this dialogue with Josep Borrell and Madeleine Albright, we had a good kickstart for a discussion on how can we make sure that the recovery will be a people's power recovery. But our European Progressive Foundation is now inviting you to come with us for a high-level panel conducted by our Secretary General, Laszlo Andor, and opened by another outstanding leader of the United Nations system, Guy Ryder, the Director General of ILO. So I hope that you enjoy, and let's keep in touch for this invention of a new world post-COVID. We want to have progressive in the lead of inventing this new world.